important subject matter around environmental racism and many other challenges really facing countries like South Africa, as we know that the country has undertaken to really just support a number of multilateral instruments when it comes to the protection of the environment. And joining us now is the UN Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights, Dr. Marcos. So thank you so much indeed for your time.
Of course, thank you for having me.
Lovely. So you look at a country like South Africa with the legacy that we have. Obviously, it's a massive challenge, the pollution, especially in those areas that are predominantly for, disadvantaged people previously at the time, but also in terms of just environmental racism. How do we overcome these, pressing challenges?
So in pre-1994 South Africa, environmental racism involved a policy of deliberately and intentionally citing black communities along polluting factories, petrochemical industries, landfills. After 1994, governments have taken significant steps in setting up laws and regulations to begin to overcome this legacy: environmental management, waste management, and yet the challenges are significant. The toxic tide still means that a number of people in the country are faced with water pollution, chemical pollution, air pollution that infringes on their right to a healthy environment. Efforts need to be redoubled, but there's hope and optimism because the government has committed to upholding fundamental human rights. It has become a member of the UN Human Rights Council, and it is actively participating and even showing leadership in multilateral environmental agreements concerning chemicals and wastes.
And also I would imagine that with the climate change factor, that's another dimension into this in terms of really seeing the need to deal with this situation. But also, apart from that, we have a number of conventions through the multilateral level. What would you say to member states like South Africa in terms of ratifying these agreements so that, the people can see the difference?
So one element of international cooperation is participating in the international agreements that have been negotiated to address issues of common concern. And in the chemicals and wastes cluster, that involves, for example, issues of mercury or issues of persistent organic pollutants, which are chemicals that are harmful to human health and the environment. They are persistent, that can travel long-range distances, and thus not one country acting alone can address the real threats that are associated to them. But it's not enough to ratify or become a party to one of these agreements. Effective implementation is, of course, key. And there, I have been very pleased to see in my official country visit the efforts that the country is exerting to, for example, eliminate polychlorinated biphenyls, which are persistent pollutants, very harmful to human health, to wildlife, that are ubiquitous in their use in electric transformers, for example, and whose elimination is very difficult to do from a technical point of view. So the project to eliminate PCBs, I think, speaks very highly in terms of the commitment to implement multilateral environmental agreements.
And you came at a critical time as South Africa is talking about just energy transition, trying to decarbonize, especially you look at provinces like Mpumalanga. I believe you went to one of the plants in Komatipoort. What was your experience, and did you just get a sense of a commitment to try and address these issues?
So overcoming the legacy of environmental racism, especially when it comes to exposure to toxic substances, poses formidable challenges, and those challenges are made all the more difficult by the energy crisis that the country is facing and by the global climate emergency that humanity is facing. South Africa derives more than 90% of its electricity from coal And this is cause for significant amounts of greenhouse gas emissions to the atmosphere. And so the decarbonization strategy of phasing out fossil fuels is a tremendous challenge for the country. I will say that challenge of decarbonization cannot be dissociated with detoxification strategies, because one problem cannot be solved on the backs of another, because detoxification and decarbonization must go together. For example, dealing with the new waste streams that will be coming in the future. What will happen with solar panels once they end their useful life? What will happen with lithium-ion batteries once they end their life? We've seen that lead batteries are still posing a serious challenge for many countries and for South Africa as well. And so anticipating these new streams offers certainly an opportunity to precisely integrate decarbonization and detoxification.
And just before I let you go, Doctor, the issue of the dumping of the toxic material in Africa has always been like a perennial issue. How's the continent doing in tackling that issue, just briefly?
Well, much better than the situation that existed back in the early 1980s, when the African continent was really seen and used as a dumping ground of toxic waste by industrialized countries. The controls that have been set up since 1989 through the Basel Convention that regulates the transboundary movement of hazardous waste is really beginning to deliver. Now, there are legacy issues from those times. Here in South Africa, I had the opportunity, for example, to visit mercury waste dumps that have been sitting there for 30 years, but now are beginning to be taken for adequate cleanup and processing in Switzerland. This is a welcome step in addressing the legacy of environmental racism of the past.